Welcome back to another episode of the Best You Podcast. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of cortisol and its impact on your health. If you've ever wondered why stress makes it so hard to shed those extra pounds or how to manage your stress levels for optimal health, this episode is for you. By the end of our discussion, you're going to have a clear understanding of how cortisol works, the negative effects of chronically elevated cortisol, and the best dietary practices to regulate it effectively. Before we dive in, I want to remind you to hit the follow button on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode packed with valuable health and wellness insights. Today, we're going to be talking with Megan Lyons, who is a double board certified clinical and holistic nutritionist, who's going to share insights on why cortisol causes us to hold on to excess body fat and what your cortisol levels should look like throughout the day. You're also going to learn actionable tips on how to eat and manage your lifestyle so that you can keep your cortisol levels balanced and promote overall well-being. Megan helps to empower busy people to successfully balance work, family, social life, and many other commitments, but who struggle with their health, so they can finally reach their goals and feel confident about their bodies. For now, it's time to get closer and closer to your best you with Megan Lyons. All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Best You Podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Megan Lyons. Megan, we're going to maybe go through a few different topics today, but I really want to start with adrenal health. And I know that it's relatively a hot topic with regards to how everybody is so stressed out all the time, 24/7 nowadays. And so I want you to frame up the conversation first with just answering the question, like, what are adrenal glands and what kind of, generally speaking, role do they play when it comes to our overall health?
Yeah, absolutely. Your adrenal glands are two tiny glands sitting on top of your kidneys, no bigger than a walnut or something like that. However, they have a huge impact on our overall health. So they're most known for secreting both cortisol and adrenaline. They do some other things too, but we'll focus most of our conversation on that. And people are familiar with both in some way, but let me make the distinction for people. When I get cut off in traffic, all of a sudden my adrenaline shoots sky high. I have a rush of that adrenaline. We feel it. We're like raring to go. Even if we were tired a moment before, we feel on alert. That is very useful, obviously, for situations like that or many others, but our adrenaline tends to go down naturally on its own, doesn't really cause problems. Cortisol does a similar thing, but it's more pronounced in chronic stress. So when I get cut off in traffic, yes, I do get a surge of cortisol, but really where cortisol plays a role is every time my phone pings, every time I get an email, every time my boss walks in, if I had a boss, every time we do anything that's kind of low grade stress, we're getting bumps and bumps and bumps of cortisol. And over time, that can lead to adrenal dysfunction, which people hear about now these days, where either your cortisol is way high, stage 2 adrenal dysfunction, or potentially it goes low if you have some kind of adrenal resistance. We can talk about all of that, but basically it means your stress mechanisms are kind of out of whack. And this leads us to feel either tired but wired, which is that stage 2. We're like, tired, how much more can I possibly handle? And yet I can't sleep. I'm on high alert. I'm going all the time. Or burnt out completely. I can't even get out of bed. I am just like, got nothing to give to the day. This is kind of an overview. I'll pause here and see where you want to go from here.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to still stay relatively high level. So it sounds like cortisol and adrenaline. I'm trying to distinguish the difference between the two. So basically, it sounds like adrenaline, you might get bigger surges in a shorter period of time, and it more naturally will go down on its own. Whereas cortisol, maybe you don't get massive like spikes or bursts like you do adrenaline, but it's not necessarily going to go down as naturally on its own because maybe there are so many like small things that cause it to stay somewhat elevated.
You totally got it. Think about it like a fire extinguisher. That's adrenaline. When it's needed, it just squirts out and it does its job. That's amazing. Cortisol is like a bathtub that the faucet didn't quite get turned off. It's just dripping, 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 which doesn't really look like a big deal. And 2 drips are not a big deal. But if it drips over time, days, weeks, months, years, then that bathtub is full and causes problems.
Awesome. Awesome. I love those two analogies, fire extinguisher in the bathtub. That makes it easy to remember. Let's stay on adrenaline because I think cortisol might take a little bit more time. From an adrenaline perspective, I know for me, being somebody who's really into sports, former athlete, a lot of people who listen to this are former athletes. I feel like we put adrenaline in the bucket of like, man, when I'm in the middle of my event, even if I feel a little bump or bruise, a little pain, like there's so much adrenaline going that I don't even feel it. Is there any negative side of adrenaline?
So I would say almost always no. However, we're also getting into this rut these days where people are hearing about dopamine and are we're getting less sensitive to dopamine, and dopamine and adrenaline often go hand in hand. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter of reward, basically, which means every time we get a social media like, or every time I don't play video games, but if you like get the jackpot on a video game or whatever you might get, I think of Mario Kart, like with a little coin, all of this stuff, we're getting dopamine. And because we're so accustomed to getting dopamine, 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 we can get a little immune to it or a little less sensitive. And same thing happens with adrenaline, which is the term adrenaline junkie, not a medical term, but it's the phenomenon where people, they just need to feel that rush. And so they're doing crazier and crazier and crazier things to get that rush because the normal rushes don't really do it for them anymore.
Okay, gotcha. So maybe the only downside of adrenaline is when you're just feel like you're always seeking it out 24/7 because you just have become so used to that feeling.
That's right.
Okay, cool. So when it comes to cortisol, I think it is chronically elevated for people. So let's talk about what happens. If I'm kind of drawing a wave with my arms, like maybe it goes up, or with my hand, maybe it goes up a little bit, comes down a little bit, but then we have a little burst of stress, whether that's from social media or whatever it is, and it's kind of like maybe gentle waves, but maybe gently kind of going up throughout the day. Then maybe when we sleep, it comes back down, but then kind of gentle waves going up. Talk to us about why that is damaging. Like, what is when the adrenals are constantly producing cortisol and not really getting that much of a break, what are the negative outcomes of that?
Yeah, great question. Well, when I suspect clients with adrenal dysfunction, and maybe they're clients like me who they really like data and it's hard to believe unless we can see it, then I'll run what's called a 4-point saliva diurnal cortisol, which basically means you spit in a tube 4 times a day, and we're measuring the cortisol throughout that day. And so what it's supposed to look like is we have this cortisol awakening response where our cortisol bumps up as soon as we wake up. And that helps us get out of bed, feel energized, all of this kind of stuff. Then that awakening response goes down, but our cortisol is kind of gradually increasing in the morning and then decreasing once we get down to the afternoon, evening. Really should be low as we're sleeping. Some research says most humans have a little unexplained bump around 2 to 3 a.m., but it should be really small. And then again, it rises up in the morning. So think about it. When we should have more energy and when we should be more alert, our cortisol is high throughout the day and then decreasing in the evening and for sleep. But when we have dysfunction, I see most commonly 2 things happen. One of which is that whole curve is elevated. So if we look at the normal range, they might follow the right patterns, but the whole thing is just creeping up and up and up. And when we have a lot of cortisol in our system, more than we want, that does several things. One of which is most a shame for many people listening, which is that it makes us store body fat. People hate cortisol for this reason. Now, I don't like to hate on cortisol because we need it. If we don't have any cortisol, we are not alive. So we need that hormone. It's just too much of it that makes us store body fat. And that's obviously frustrating. Also leads to brain fog. And then really importantly, cortisol is a hormone, and all hormones play together as a symphony. So I like to have the analogy, if I have an orchestra, these are all my hormones. Let's say the violinist is cortisol, and the violinist just goes rogue one day. The violinist starts playing really fast or really loud or whatever. Well, then what do the other members of the orchestra do? They're going to try to keep putting on a show. Maybe they play really fast to keep up with the violinist, or maybe they just stop for a little while and try to pretend the violinist was supposed to have a solo, or maybe they play louder to cover up the violinist. They're going to try to alter their patterns because this violinist has gone rogue. And same thing happens with us. Our sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, our hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin, insulin, which is a blood sugar regulating hormone. All these hormones can kind of go off if we have elevated cortisol over time. Then to close, second pattern that I commonly see, not just the whole curve is elevated, but it's abnormally elevated. So maybe they have really high cortisol in the morning. They're like really raring to go. And then they crash in the afternoon. They have absolutely nothing. Something like that, where just different parts of the chart are off, can be common.
Okay. And let's talk about when this starts to become a problem, because, it's one of those things where I can almost imagine, kind of like I was just drawing with my hands, and I actually drew a little chart on my page too, right? If it's really elevated in the morning, maybe then slight elevation throughout the day, and then starts to come down in the afternoon, and maybe ideally it resets when you sleep back to baseline of the previous day. But let's say, just for sake of numbers, and these are not the numbers that come up on a medical term, but just for ease of digestion of the listener, is if it's at 0 and then it's supposed to finish at 0, but at the end of the day, when you wake up the next day, it's at 10, and the next day it's 20, and next day it's 30. It's then it starts to slowly but surely go up. At what point does it start to really become a problem to our health and storing body fat and energy levels and stuff like that?
That's a really good question. And there's not a cutoff. This is not like a cliff where you can get closer and closer and closer, but then once you fall off, you're in trouble. Cortisol is really more like a slow burn. So I always like to remind myself and my clients, our bodies are working for us. They're trying to be healthy. Our body's trying to get us back to balance and stability. So if we catch it early enough, if someone listening is like, oh man, I have been stressed. Yeah, I have had that insomnia. I have been having difficulty losing body fat. I have that brain fog. But really, it's only been a month or two of that. Well, if they just focus on some real self-care, whether for them that means meditation or being with friends, or maybe cutting back on the high intensity exercise for a short period of time, or laying off the alcohol or caffeine or whatever it is for them, then their body's going to recover very quickly. The deeper we dig ourselves into the hole, though, the longer it takes to recover. So if people ignore it over and over and over and over, the problems just keep getting more severe. In terms of your question, when is it really a problem? I mean, when people literally need medical attention is when they physically can't get out of bed, or they're falling asleep uncontrollably in the middle of the day, something like that. But most people listening haven't gotten to that point. They're experiencing more of those low grade symptoms, which are still problematic and a pain.
Right. No doubt. No doubt. I want to go back. I want to go through a few of the topics that you've hit thus far and dive a little bit deeper into them. The first one that a lot of people have heard of and want to avoid is the fact that cortisol causes you to store body fat. From a metabolism perspective, are you just literally, your body is kind of because it's on stress mode, feels like it needs to hold on, and so it's actually more efficient at burning calories? Efficient meaning it's not burning as many. Is that slowing down your basal metabolic rate? Is it going to decrease the number of calories that you burn when you're going on a walk? Is it going to decrease the number of calories that you're burning when you're exercising? Talk to us about how cortisol causes us to store body fat.
Yeah, you hit several nails on the head. I can think of three main mechanisms. One is cortisol works hand in hand with insulin. So it makes us less insulin sensitive, which means the sugar, any carbohydrates that we eat are floating around in our bloodstream more and not getting into our cells for energy. Second is that when people have cortisol or adrenal dysregulation over a long period of time, you're right, the basal metabolic rate slows. Now, I don't want people to think, oh, shoot, I had a stressful day yesterday, I'm in trouble. It's really not like that. But over a long period of time, we have bradycardia, which is slow heart rate. Our whole body is like slowing down, trying to preserve us because it feels like it's in trouble. And then the third nail that you hit is when people think of stress, it's helpful to think, okay, evolutionarily, what would this have done? Well, if I'm stressed because I have to run from a lion or I have to migrate across the country because a competing tribe's coming my way or whatever, it's not the time to be burning fat very efficiently. So my body is slowing down to conserve that because it knows I'm in trouble.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's very well. That in and of itself is not awesome, but that was great. That was very informative and insightful. Now, one of the things I think when it comes to a lot of health and fitness topics is sometimes people dive too deep into the weeds of things that are important, but they're a lot further down the line, and a lot of people call it majoring in the minors. How important is this whole cortisol conversation? Is it something that is worth really exploring for a lot of people? Is it worth really exploring for some people who are experiencing the symptoms? Like, how overall important is this conversation?
You know, that's a hard answer to give, but I'll do my best at it. I always, 100% of the time, think that the basics are most important. And so I know I'm a human too, and human nature is to look for the answer, in quotes, the answer, like there's something, oh, I'm just missing this supplement, or I'm just missing whatever. It is easier to think there's one cause than, oh, shoot, I'm eating a little too much candy from the candy jar, or I'm not sleeping, or I haven't been moving, or whatever. So it always is easier. And I very much believe that people are not lazy or making it up or anything like that when they say they're trying to do everything. But sometimes having someone else take a good hard look at that, whether it's a nutritionist or any other person, can help you kind of understand, oh, there are some foundations that are missing. So in that way, I would say, well, maybe I'll give you a percentage of my client population that has true adrenal issues. People come to me when they've tried other things, right? So I'm not the first rodeo, but even then, I would say probably 10% of people have true adrenal dysregulation. So it's not like everyone has it walking around, but it is a serious and significant thing.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things, like you said, it's a continuum. So it's maybe they're not to the point where you would maybe call it complete adrenal dysregulation or whatnot, but like they could be going in that direction. And so working on making sure that it doesn't go too much in the wrong direction. I'm curious, when it comes to like high intensity exercise or whatnot, I guess I'm going to end up asking the question, and then I'll frame it up a little bit of, do different people have the ability to more quickly down regulate their cortisol levels more than others? Because, somebody who might be a long-term or have been an athlete for a long time and used to training at high intensities, very regularly throughout the week, do they have the ability, their cortisol might be going higher more regularly than a lot of people, but maybe they're tolerable to it or tolerant to it. And so it comes down quicker than somebody who maybe has not built up that that workload in the past. Is that a thing? Do people have the ability to lower their cortisol more quickly than others?
You are absolutely right. So our whole autonomic nervous system, which is, I think, automatic, it's like subconscious nervous system, that all goes hand in hand. So let's just take a random beats per minute for a heart rate and say someone who is two people who are 35-year-old males, so they have the same age heart. They both get their heart rate up to 180 beats per minute. Now, one is this athlete, and he can recover that heart rate much quicker. The other one might take him 5, 10, 20, 60 minutes to recover that heart rate because his autonomic nervous system is not well trained. And that is a very good approximation for how well we will recover from cortisol. So I do think that your point here in terms of exercise, if someone has been training for a long period of time, I'm going to be a lot less stringent about their exercise regulations. I know they can handle it, even if they're in adrenal dysfunction. Maybe we need to work on other things because athletes might not be, having downtime in the rest of the day or whatever. There are plenty of other things to work on. But what I tend to see very frequently is I'm going to be stereotypical here. Most of the client, I'd say 65 to 75% of the clients I work with are women. And so women tend to be more likely to ramp up intense exercise when they're untrained if they're not getting the results they want, meaning they haven't been exercising at a high intensity regularly, and then they decide they want to lose weight, and boom, all of a sudden they're hitting the gym 7 times a week and they've been going 0 times before. That big increase is not really doing favors to our adrenals.
Gotcha. I want to talk about things that we can do throughout the day that help us get cortisol back to baseline, where we start at the beginning of the day. And I have a couple thoughts running through my mind. The first thought is, thinking about that curve that throughout the day, in the beginning in the morning, it's really high and then maybe continues to elevate at a little bit slower rate. And in the afternoon, it's supposed to come down. One of my thoughts around that is, in the afternoon, around 4, 5, 6 o'clock is when so many people are on social media, and that's holding them back from the ability to bring their cortisol back to baseline. Obviously, people not getting the appropriate quantity and quality of sleep is probably holding people back from getting to baseline. So I'm sure those things are relevant to ensuring our healthy cortisol levels. What are some other, I think when it comes to stress, things like breath work, things like meditation, things like journaling are so commonly talked about and are seemingly becoming more prevalent, but they're not necessarily seemingly solving the problem because if they're becoming more prevalent, but also stress is continuing to become more prevalent. Well, I guess, and you can go a lot of different ways with this as you want to, but what are some good ways to ensure that we can manage our cortisol levels and get them back to baseline by the beginning of the next day, basically? Are you somebody who used to be confident in your health, but you've fallen out of a good routine and you're looking to regain the confidence in your body and your health that you once had? What's up, you guys? I'm Nick Carrier, and I'm a body optimization coach and creator of the 10-week transformation that has transformed the bodies and the lives of over 700 people thus far. And I want to tell you about the 10-week transformation challenge. This is a challenge that will completely reset the way that you feel. It's going to completely change the way that you see yourself in the mirror and transform the way that you look at yourself in the mirror. We have a proven framework called the 5 steps to goal success that's going to allow you to set a very specific target, a very specific goal to be at by the end of the 10 weeks. Then we're going to set weekly goals. Then we're going to have the most badass workouts that there are. And you're going to completely transform the way you look and feel in just 10 short weeks. This isn't just trying to look different or trying to feel different or trying to eat healthier or trying to exercise more. This is a plan to do it at a super high level. And I'm the best fitness coach here in Nashville, Tennessee. And if you're in Nashville, you can join today at nickcarrier.com/10WT. If you're not in Nashville, we have a virtual version of the program as well that you can also find at nickcarrier.com/10WT. So click on that link below and you will not regret it. There's over 700 people that have done it this far. There have been people who have done it 10, 11, 12, 13 times because they've seen such great results and just can't stop. So go nickcarrier.com/10WT to get started today.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll give you my best answer. Again, it's hard to give one answer. But I'll tell you, my interest in the subject all stemmed from my own adrenal dysfunction. So I went to a doctor when I was 23 years old. She tested my hormones and she said my sex hormones were at lower levels than the postmenopausal women she saw. And so at 23, I'm like, something doesn't add up. It turns out it was all my adrenals. Now take me back to me at 23. I would have done anything that you told me. Take a supplement, check. Do breath work, check. Meditation, check. do walking, check, like doing the things was not the problem for me. But I had to really look inside and ask myself, what is the root of my stress? And it was this intense need to control every single aspect of my life and my business and my health and every single thing. And so for me, it stemmed from learning to let go, release some of that control, which is a lot harder than just checking the box of doing something. And for someone else, it might look different. So I ask clients if I had a magic button and you could tap it and just change one thing in your life that would take away your stress, or you could do one thing right now that would alleviate your stress. What is it? And sometimes they say, gosh, I just need more time with my friends. And sometimes they say, I need a vacation. My boss is driving me crazy. They'll say all kinds of different things, but that gives us a clue into what they need. People often know what they need to regulate their adrenals, and it's just we shove that under the rug. So maybe it is breath work for some people. It actually does work if we really tap into it and practice it. Maybe it is more sleep. Maybe it is time away from social media. Maybe it is cutting the sugar or whatever else it is. People often know.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about your journey. At 23, you said they told you your sex hormones are lower than postmenopausal women, and the root of your stress was the intense need to control everything. So what did that look like to release that control? Because obviously that's a lot easier said than done. Was it just trying to do mindset shifts? Like what are the different things that you worked on to improve that? And was that the primary catalyst to maybe sex hormones going back up to healthier levels?
Yeah. So the primary catalyst was really taking a holistic look at my lifestyle. I had short story is I on move-in day met this cute guy who was on the track and cross country team in college. He's now my husband 21 years later, but that led me to start running to like try to impress him or get his attention. And I take everything to the extreme. So running is great. I still run some to this day. But when you are under fueling, which I was, because again, getting my nutrition information from magazines back then, not even social media, and they were saying, eat protein bars for lunch. I'm like, check, I could do that. So under fueling, over cardioing, over stressing, this intense need to control, not sleeping. This just all culminated in kind of an adrenal disaster for me. And what did it look like to heal? For me, again, every person's journey is different. For me, it looked like getting radically honest with myself. Like, what are you trying to do? At the end of the day, you don't actually have control. So I did a lot of journaling, which I resisted before because I thought it was a giant waste of time. But I found for me, and again, some people are talking to therapists, some people are talking to friends. For me, talking to myself through journaling was the most effective way to do it, and just kind of unraveling some of that. And then, like you said, mindset work. I have read more books than I even can count to numbers, probably, on releasing control, letting go. And it just takes continuous reminders. So for me, it was control. For other people, it's different things. But if that has been raveled up or knotted up for you, just think about little action steps you could take. So maybe one day for me, it was, hey, I'm not going to plan my schedule on a Saturday. Well, that sounds ridiculous to some people, but for controlling me in the past, that would have felt really scary. That was a baby step. And then maybe the next day it's, okay, I'm not going to prepare for this meeting tomorrow. Let's see how it goes. It's just little baby steps to get you there.
Yeah, I think I love this conversation. And one of the things that I've learned when coaching people who are dealing with stress and stuff like that, sometimes it's less about giving them something to do, because that just can provide more stress to get that thing done. Because it's like, meditate for this long, breath work for this long. It's another thing that you have to do. And then you stress yourself out about getting that done. And sometimes it's about actually alleviating rather than maybe adding something in. But talk to me a little bit about the journaling. I think some people do journaling. Some people know how to navigate it well. A lot of people probably don't, because I know a lot of people I've heard, like, people say I should be journaling, but I don't even know what to journal about. Like, what are the different useful conversations that you had with yourself, or different questions that you posed to yourself that you found useful when going through the journaling process?
Yes, I stumbled across something called morning pages which was from a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I think that was published in like 1990 or something, a long time ago. But the concept is very simple. It's just free write 3 pages per day. And don't judge yourself. It really doesn't matter what you're writing. Just go. And so I will say I tried that first. I found myself really second guessing, over analyzing. It felt really uncomfortable. So then I transitioned into prompts. I would just Google, probably back in the day, even different journal prompts, and I would just give myself one for each day. That lasted for maybe like 2 to 3 months. I found it helpful, but then I went back to the free write. Once I got comfortable with the active journaling, I went back to the free write, and I think the free write is magical. The key here is to not judge yourself, which I was doing. I was constantly thinking crazy thing, like, oh my gosh, what if I die today and then someone comes and reads my journal and this is how they're going to remember me, so I have to look positive or whatever, like really overanalyzing this stuff. And now I remember no one's going to read it, and if they do, maybe I'm gone, whatever. I just don't think about that anymore. But I've heard people say free write illegibly, even if you're stressed about that. Just scribble, just go, 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 go. What people might find, like I did, is that things just start flowing and you start solving your own problems. It might start out like, oh, today's a good day. My dog is feeling happy today. My coffee is good, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting into stuff that was deep in there that I'm just finally allowing myself to feel and flow through and all of that. So I'm really a big fan of the free write, even though I used to think it was a waste of time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think that's so true. I've done probably a lot more limited journaling than yourself, but I've definitely found the same thing with regards to free writing. When you first sit there, you're like, what am I going to write about? But if you just allow yourself to write not like nothing or nonsense in the beginning, you definitely will start to find things to write about. This has been great. I do have one more question to kind of wrap up the adrenal health conversation in the interview. You know, we've talked a lot about behavioral things, kind of a little bit of exercise things when it comes to adrenal health and cortisol levels and things of that nature. How important is nutrition when it comes to adrenal health? Is that something that moves the needle on cortisol and adrenal health a lot? And if so, what are like some of the best foods to be eating for adrenal health? And are those different than just overall health, or are there specific ones for adrenal health?
Well, I would say they may or may not be different from regular health, depending on
Right.
what your bias is towards regular health. But for adrenals, it's very important to have a balance of macronutrients. So macronutrients, I'm sure people listening are familiar, but protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And it has become popular and effective in many cases for some people to go lower on one or higher on one or whatever. But when we have adrenal dysfunction, we really need all of those, because it is a state of stress. Let's say going through ketosis, which again can be super useful in some cases. That's a stress on your adrenals. Or going into very low fat diet, that's a stress on your adrenals. Or low protein diet, that's a stress on your adrenals. And what we're trying to do is tell our adrenals, you're safe, you've got your bases covered, you can start turning back on brain function, start turning on hormones, start turning on metabolism, because you're good. So we want to give a really good balance of all protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And then for adrenal function as well, 2 other categories are very important. One is those really antioxidant rich vegetables and fruits. So we think like dark colored berries, pomegranates, broccoli, kale, anything like that that has a really dark color, that it has a lot of nutrients that your adrenals just really soak up. And then actually, believe it or not, things like liver, which is super nutrient dense, other kinds of organ meats are very healing for adrenals. So some people, myself included, like I've tried to cook liver many times and I just can't really get it right. So I'll supplement with powders or capsules or something like that, those can all be helpful. But getting back to the basics and those organ meats with a wide array of amino acids, that can be very helpful.
Awesome. One thing that I forgot to ask, and I think that would be a big disservice to people in this conversation, is talking about how this shows up on blood work, how this shows up through testing. If somebody feels like I need to go get tested for this because I am tired but wired. I do have I do crash in the second part of the day. I do have some of these symptoms. What am I looking for when I'm going to get testing done that gives me a signal or a notification like, hey, this is something that you need to either be wary of or like needs to be fixed soon?
Yeah. I strongly recommend people getting the saliva cortisol test. If your practitioner will order it, that is the best way to do it. It's 4 or 6 points in the day with saliva. All the research will show that's the best way. Now, if that's not accessible to you or your practitioner won't or doesn't know how to order that, we can do a few approximations in blood tests. It's just not quite as good. So you can measure cortisol in blood. The problem is it's very temporary or transient. So if I'm really stressed right in that moment, my cortisol will be high in blood, even if I don't have adrenal dysfunction. So it's really not that great. It can tell if we're way out of whack, but it can't tell if we're more sensitive. I would also have someone measure a DHEA. So people have heard of DHA, like DHA and EPA. Those are the omega-3 fatty acids in fish oil, but this is DHEA, which is a building block to other hormones. And a lot of times when we have adrenal dysfunction, our DHEA will get out of whack as well. And then the last, which really could be multifactorial, but I find when people are truly eating a low sugar, balanced carbohydrate diet and their A1C, which is a blood sugar metric, if that's still creeping up and it's like unexplainable, they're really doing great overall, but maybe they're pre-diabetic or diabetic, that's a good sign to me that we want to go further on adrenal testing.
Awesome. This has been super informative today, super educational. I feel like I came in knowing a little bit about this stuff, and obviously I'm not the master like you, but you have given a master class here in these short 30 plus minutes on adrenal health, cortisol, adrenaline, and all that kind of stuff. So this has been absolutely phenomenal. You guys need to make sure you go follow Megan on Instagram at The Lyons Share. And then you can go to her website, thelionsshare.org. And she also has a podcast herself called the Wellness Your Way Podcast, and a lot of great information there that we'll have linked up in the show notes and in the description and everything like that. But is there any other good place where people should go to learn more about you, Megan?
No, you've got it covered.
Awesome. Well, again, masterclass today on adrenal health. I really appreciate you going deep into the subject and providing so much value and clarity around this stuff. So people who are maybe in the wrong trajectory or in the wrong trajectory with regards to their adrenal health, they can start to reverse it. And then if they're really far on the other end, they can figure out what to do as well. So it's been great today, Megan. You guys make sure you share the podcast with a friend or family member, especially if you feel like they are dealing with chronic stress and things like that. Make sure you follow the show and go follow Megan on Instagram. But that's all we got today, Megan. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thanks so much, Nick.
Wow, what an insightful episode. Megan shared some incredible knowledge about managing cortisol and its impact on our health. The main piece of value from today was understanding how to balance your cortisol levels through diet and through your lifestyle in order to achieve your health goals. Before we wrap it up, don't forget to follow the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode packed with valuable insights. Here are my 3 biggest takeaways from today's episode with Megan. Number 1, understand cortisol. Knowing what cortisol is and how it affects your body is the first step to managing it effectively. Number 2, manage your stress. Chronic stress can lead to elevated cortisol levels, making it harder to lose weight and maintain your overall health and energy levels. Find ways to reduce and manage your stress daily. And third and finally, healthy eating habits. Adopting a diet that helps regulate cortisol can significantly impact your health and well-being, and we do that by eating a diet that's balanced in macronutrients, not going to any sort of extremes. If you can do these things, then it'll help you to continue to get closer to the healthiest version of yourself and ultimately closer and closer to your best you.